This is The Joe Gaither Show on BamaCentral.com.
Good afternoon, Tuscaloosa, Internet World, West Alabama. How are you doing today? Monday, we're about halfway through the month of June, so we're counting it down till football season, 74, 75 days until Alabama gets kicked off. We appreciate everybody watching us on the Joe Gaither Show. You're watching us on YouTube, on Facebook, or on Twitter. You're listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or on Amazon. You can find this show, the Joe Gaither Show, on Bama Central at Joe Gaither 6 on any of my social media machines, or you can find it, of course, on those podcast platforms. We appreciate everybody tuning in and joining us, or you're watching us on the Bama Central YouTube channel, Bama Central, your home for the Joe Gaither Show. What are we going to do today? We got three little Alabama topics to get into. Then we're going to talk to Joey Van Zummeren of Mizzou Central to talk about Missouri basketball. Oh, my gosh, didn't win a single game last year in SEC play. And then we're going to talk to Kim Rankin about Boston College. So, Boston College and their football program. Boston College hiring former Alabama offensive coordinator Bill O'Brien. So we're going to go out and talk to Kim Rankin on BC Central. But first, we're going to talk Alabama, of course. And what do we want to talk about? You want to talk about recruiting first, or you want to talk about gambling? Gambling with the basketball and gambling with the football team. What do we want to go with? Let's go with recruiting first, as Alabama hosted its third official visitor weekend this past weekend. And by all accounts, it seemed like Alabama had a really, really strong weekend. You can see that by getting commitments on Saturday from a punter and on Sunday from a defensive lineman. And tomorrow, Jackson Lloyd, offensive lineman, tomorrow at 2 o'clock, Jackson Lloyd, offensive lineman out of California, is going to announce his commitment. And many, many people feel like it's going to be a favorable decision for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Let's put Jackson Lloyd on the front burner. We'll talk about him tomorrow as we await his decision, but we want to look at the two commitments from this past weekend. And let's knock out maybe the unsexy pick first by talking about the punter. We're going to talk about, oh, goodness gracious, Alex Asperov. Asperov. Asparuhov. Asperov. Alex Asperov. He commits to Alabama as the number 2 punter in the class. Let's adjust that so everybody can see it. As the number 2 punter in the class. If you're watching us on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, we've got his huddle highlight tapes up, and my man's can bomb it. He averaged just over 45 yards a punt last season, and really you can see it on his tape that he's punting, kicking off. He's place kicking. He is a versatile specialist. And so for Alabama, you're going to be losing James Burnip here fairly soon. I think Burnip's got one more year left of eligibility, so you got to bring in a punter or really just a specialist who can do it all. Obviously, you got Graham Nicholson to do the place kicking this year, and you got Connor Talty from Chicago last season to come in as a freshman last year, so he's still kind of marinating on the bench to handle the kicking duties. We'll see how this plays out with Alabama in the specialist room, but very, very, I mean, it's not sexy, but it's very needed. Alex Asperov from San Joaquin Memorial High School in Fresno, California. He's 6'3". He's 190 pounds. He had scholarship offers from Oklahoma and from Florida, so big name kicker. And if you follow kicking at all, or if you follow special teams at all, Jamie Cole is kind of your go-to special teams guy for high school recruiting, and Jamie Cole has him as the number 2 punter in this year's class. Let me see if I can pull up his. Alex Asperov. Yeah, his profile with Jamie Cole. Jamie Cole. Yep, here we go, right there. Just not kickers. He is a punter. Number two punter in the class. He's committed to Alabama. His comments are Asperov might be the most fundamentally sound punter in the 2025 class. He scored well at the underclassmen challenge by accumulating 109 points, whatever that means at his camp. When in rhythm, he is in control, and his control and repeatability is special. He scored those 109 points on a cold 40-degree night in December of 2023. He made a big jump at the Western Showcase camp earlier this year. He graded out at a 5-star level as a punter and at a 4.5-star level as a kicker. He scored 110 points in punting, 6 of his 15 points on field goals, and 103 points on kickoffs. These are all camp metrics that they use at the Jamie Cole kicking camp. His punting is very impressive, and he's already a college prospect in punting. He competed at his first Cole's ranked event during the 2022 Cole, California Winter Showcase Camp. He finished that event with a 39.5-yard average throughout the punt charting. He is way ahead of his age as a punter. Asperov has the makings of a D1 punter and will be exciting to follow this spring and summer. So you can read about Alex Asperov on BamaCentral.com. But my biggest point is the fact that you are winning in areas maybe that others aren't necessarily emphasizing as much. I think it's interesting for Kalen DeBoer to use a scholarship on a punter, but I think it shows you exactly how important it is in this day and time to really give your defense a lot of field position and play the field position game. I can't really say that, I'm so excited about Alex Asperov because it's hard for me to get jacked up about a punter, but you can see him in these clips showing great control, getting the ball off quickly, having, a pretty solid drop and really a really high hang time. If you remember back to the Coach Saban days, his biggest maybe gold star for punters was hang time. You can boot the ball a million miles, but if it's in the returner's hands before your coverage team can get down there on the field, then maybe the length and distance for a punt is not necessarily as impressive. Whoop, yeah, that's the end of his video right there. So Alex Asperov becomes Alabama's new punter and becomes the 15th commitment in this current class. And so he got the ball rolling for Saturday, and Alabama really kept it going on Sunday by pulling in London Simmons. London Simmons will look at his tape on the Huddle machine. We appreciate Huddle for hooking us up right here. You can always look these guys up on Huddle in your own time if you want to see them again. But London Simmons is rated as the number 56 overall defensive lineman and the 16th overall player in the state of Mississippi. He's out of Hartfield Academy in Flowood, Mississippi. But I think that he is a bit of an underrated prospect, and maybe that's the line that we always take with a 3-star commitment. But it seems like the Courtney Morgans of the world and Freddie Roaches are very, very excited about London Simmons' recruitment. He's listed at 6'3", 295 pounds, but reportedly lost a bunch of weight to get himself ready for this coming up season. When we watch him on his tape, you see he is an overpowering player. He's very physically strong, and he's not getting pushed off the ball hardly at all. You see him getting into the backfield right here on this clip and making a big tackle for a loss. He's got a pretty nice little motor on tape. You can see him chasing down this quarterback on the option keeper. And I think that really, this is going to be a guy that you will see rise up the recruiting ranks. I think sometimes with how much high school football is played across the country, you get a lot of guys who are falling through the cracks. My first thought goes to Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs was a 3-star prospect out of Oklahoma and turned himself into a first-round draft pick for the Raiders, and now he's playing for the Green Bay Packers. But really, you see 3-star prospect and rival fan bases use it to, poo-poo, he's no good, you can't recruit anymore. And obviously the 5 stars are 5 stars for a reason. And I don't know if this guy's going to get up to a 5th star, but he doesn't look like a scrub by any means. 80 tackles last year. He had how many foot? He had, I think I read that he had 15 sacks, and 20 of those tackles were for a loss. You see him getting into the backfield, and and you see him penetrating defenses pretty easily in the state of Mississippi. Now, you like the versatility that he shows. He plays a little bit of defensive tackle, defensive end, and he plays a little bit of nose tackle, zero technique on right in front of the center as well. So Alabama gets 2 commits over the weekend, and both of them they might not be the superstar player, but I think both are going to be very, very vital for this class. You look at London Simmons, he joins Antonio Coleman as the 2 defensive linemen in the class, and I think that you're still not done. You're at 16 commits, and your spots are now starting to dwindle just a little bit. You got 16 commits, and you're probably going to end up with no more than 11 more, no more than 10 more. I think 26, 27 is probably your cap. And I think that if you're really being realistic, it's probably going to be 24 or 25 members in this class of 2025. And so what's that mean? That means you got about 9 spots left. 9 spots left. There's going to be one more big recruiting weekend for Alabama coming up this weekend. They went 4 in a row. They scheduled 4 in a row. And then I guess the time between the rest of June and then July is going to be a little bit of time for the coaches to get a break on the recruiting trail and get ready for the upcoming season. So one more recruiting weekend. What I've been impressed with is that every single one of these official visit weekends, you've had 3 in a row now, every single visit has yielded at least 2 commits. You've had 6 commits in the month of June. You had Keelan Russell, you had Chuck McDonald, you had Mal Waldrop, you had Michael Carroll. Now you have Alex Asparov and London Simmons, and I do feel pretty strongly that Alabama is going to get this offensive lineman as well tomorrow. So it's an exciting time for Alabama recruiting as they're continuing to ramp up the class of 2025. You're looking for Jackson Lloyd, 4-star offensive lineman out of California, to commit tomorrow. Jackson Lloyd, a three-sport athlete playing basketball and baseball. He's really been chased by Southern California as well. So I think Jackson Lloyd becomes the 17th member of the Alabama Crimson Tide class tomorrow. Alabama still sits at the number 3 class in the country, sitting still behind Ohio State and Notre Dame. But for Kalen DeBoer, Husky Harsin has quickly turned into born on third base Harsin. You're just recruiting Nick Saban's old contacts, and I don't think that's true at all. I mean, certainly there's relationship carryover for sure, but I don't think that he was born on third base. What I think is you're seeing a combination of a staff who is a little more hip than Coach Saban and really connecting with this recruiting class, these recruits at a very high level. And then you combine Alabama's pedigree and Alabama's resources and Alabama's direct path to the NFL and championship level program. You add it all together, it seems like a really, really good time to be recruiting for the University of Alabama. Let's hit 2 more Alabama topics before we turn it over to Joey Van Zummeren of Mizzou Central and Kim Rankin of BC Central, talking Missouri basketball and Boston College football. We're going to go into, you want to go basketball or football first? Let's continue the football. Jalen Milroe, new Heisman odds come out from BetAG, BetOnline AG. New Heisman odds have Jalen Milroe tied for 5th in the Heisman odds. 1,500 plus 1,500 if you're still thinking about betting on Jalen Milroe to win the Heisman Trophy. Here's his top competition, according to BetOnline AG. Carson Beck at plus 750 is the highest rated play. It has the most favorable odds for the house. Then Quinn Ewers, the second best odds. Dylan Gabriel, the quarterback for Oregon, has the third best odds. Will Howard, the Ohio State quarterback, has the 4th best odds. And Jalen Milroe is tied with Jackson Dart and Nico Iamaleava as the 5th best odds to win the Heisman Trophy. I wonder what's at play there, because Jalen Milroe finished 6th last year in the Heisman Trophy, and nobody, not Quinn Ewers, not Carson Beck, not Dylan Gabriel, or Will Howard, finished better than Jalen Milroe, but he is sitting there behind him, and so I wonder why. And I wonder if people, we went over this with Mason Woods last week when we discussed all the Alabama games, game by game by game, and we're really predicting the Alabama season, we talked about how I think that people are really underestimating how Kalen DeBoer will utilize the Alabama offensive players and the offensive skill sets that are already in the room. You look at Jalen Milroe, and I definitely do think that reading a defense is still an area where he can improve. Not something he does horribly, but an area that he can improve. Reading a defense post snap, but I think that Kalen DeBoer will simplify things for Jalen Milroe, and the year of experience that he had, and the tape that he has to be able to watch, and everything that he has gone through as Alabama's starting quarterback, I think will only pay off, and I think that he will have an extremely strong year this year. And we talked about it again, going back to the Mason Woods conversation, that I think Jeremy Bernard, his transfer in from Washington to Alabama, is going to give Jalen Milroe a wide receiver that he did not have last year. No disrespect to Jermaine Burton, Isaiah Bond, but I think that Jeremy Bernard is going to come into Tuscaloosa and be a true wide receiver one, and thus give Jalen Milroe a real target to rely on down in and down out, and furthermore give the Alabama offense a weapon that forces defenses to adjust their coverage accordingly. And then you throw in Justin Saints, Richard Young, and Jam Miller in the backfield, and I think you've got a three-headed monster in the running game and a year more mature offensive line in Caden Proctor and Jaden Roberts. I think that you're looking at an offensive line and just a combination that will make Jalen Milroe's life 10 times easier this coming year. Better coaching, a little more simplistic style, more creative style, but I think it's going to be simplified game plan. But I think I know that's a contrasting statement. I think the language and verbiage is going to be simpler, but I think that the play calling is going to be more creative and thus stress the defenses more. And then you add the weapons. I think the quality of weapons, the quality of wide receiver, the quality of running back is going to force defenses into maybe showing their hand a little bit more before in pre-snap. And thus, Jalen Milroe, with his experience, will have more success because, I've seen this before. The defense is tipping their hand. They're in this coverage to kind of combat Jeremy Bernard. I just think that everything is going to go much, much smoother for the Alabama offense this season. And while Jalen Milroe had moments of absolute wow last season, it certainly was not always the smoothest operation. And so I think that this year it's going to be much smoother for Jalen Milroe. And you get him at plus 1,500. You get him at plus 1,500 as the fifth best odds. I think that's good, really. If you're a gambler, and I am not really, because I don't like to lose money. I just like to pay attention to the lines and pretend. I'll gamble with my pretend money in my head, and if I win or lose, then I'm just a dummy with egg on my face, but my wallet is safe. I think it's a good bet. I think if I had $100 just to burn, I might throw it on Jalen Milroe to win, and then at the end of the year in December, I might be counting my $1,500 return. I think that that's a really good bet. Now I think it's a better bet than Dylan Gabriel at Oregon. I think it's a better bet than Will Howard at Ohio State. I think it's a better bet than Nico Ayamaleva. You're looking at these guys. Carson Beck. Look, I think Carson Beck is probably the easiest bet to make, but will Georgia have a very explosive offense? I'm not expecting that. I'm expecting still more of a run-first, conservative style offense. Let the defense win the games for Georgia. Now, I think Carson Beck is still a good quarterback and is probably one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the country this coming season. But will his numbers pop off the page and give you, that's a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback? Or will Georgia just be undefeated and he'll get an invitation to New York as a legacy invitee? I don't know. You decide. Quinn Ewers, I think Quinn Ewers has a chance in the Steve Sarkisian offense to light that baby up. And yeah, they did get Amari Niblack and they did get Isaiah Bond. out of the transfer portal, but you lost Xavier Worthy and you lost Adonai Mitchell, two wide receivers who Xavier Worthy, first round draft pick, Adonai Mitchell, I think was drafted in the second round. Those guys were incredible. Those guys were absolutely incredible. And I mean, they both hurt Alabama here in Tuscaloosa last season. Quinn Ewers had a real good game, but it was Adonai Mitchell getting over the top. It was Xavier Worthy getting over the top on the Alabama defense that really gave people trouble. So will Isaiah Bond do that? Will Amari Niblack do that in the middle for Quinn Ewers? I think that there's a little bit more risk at play with Quinn Ewers. Now, I do trust Steve Sarkisian and his play calling. I think their offense will still be one of the better offenses in the country. I just wonder if the loss of Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell will prevent Quinn Ewers from having as explosive numbers as he did last season. Now, I like Jackson Dart. I like Jackson Dart as a pick because I think the Ole Miss schedule is very favorable for the Rebels. So if I were a betting man and I had $100 and you gave me this list, I think that I would be first. I mean, my bias is showing I'd be betting on Jalen Milroe. And you say, okay, take Jalen Milroe away, Joe. Who are you betting on? I think that I'd be betting on Jackson Dart second. Probably because of the payout. The payout at plus 1,500 is much better than the payout at plus 900. And yes, there's more risk there, but I love Lane Kiffin and what he does offensively. And I believe that Ole Miss has a very favorable schedule that the Rebels could find themselves in the SEC championship or in the college football playoff. So I think my number 2 pick would be Jackson Dart, and my number 3 would be Quinn Ewers. I think I'm passing on betting on Carson Beck because the value is just not as good there at plus 750, and I don't know how explosive they're going to be. So that's the updated odds, the updated Heisman Trophy odds. Jalen Milroe with the fifth most favorable Heisman Trophy odds, according to, once again, Bet Online AG. Well, basketball. You want to flip to basketball before we hear from Joey Van Zummeren? This will be a nice little transition. We'll do Alabama basketball, and then we'll talk to Joey Van Zummeren about Missouri basketball. Oh, my gosh. How do you go winless in conference play? I think that I would do terrible things to my own health if Alabama went winless in conference play. Alabama basketball, this is still according to Bet Online AG. Updated odds. Alabama basketball at 8-1 is the national championship favorite. And if you watch just a minute with Will Miller right there on BamaCentral.com, you heard us talking today about Alabama's New Jersey numbers. You saw Alabama's jerseys get solidified and finalized for all 13 scholarship players, 0 for LeBaron Philon, 22 for Aiden Sherrill, 95 for Houston Millette. And you've heard me kind of complain about that 95 just a little bit. Obviously, Mark Sears in number 1 and Grant Nelson in number 4, Latrell Wrightsell in number 3. The roster is absolutely loaded. Absolutely loaded. But to see Alabama as NCAA tournament winner 2025 favorites at 8-1, favorites over UConn 9-1, favorites over Kansas at 10-1, favorites over Duke at 14-1, Duke and Houston both 14-1, Gonzaga 18-1, and North Carolina 20-1. Just as absolutely mind-boggling. And I know we've got 75 days until football season gets started. Alabama kicking it off against Western Kentucky right here in Bryant-Denny Stadium. But this just makes me more excited for Alabama basketball season. This just sends me into a fervor. Now, will I be upset and kind of be down in the doldrums for lost games in non-conference play? I will, but I'll have to replay this clip and remind myself that non-conference play is all just a setup for the SEC season, and it's all building towards March. Alabama, we talked about it last week about how difficult the schedule is. You're getting Houston out there in Las Vegas. You're going to North Carolina, both of those teams in the top 10 of national championship odds. You've got a really challenging schedule. Auburn at 28-1, Arkansas at 25-1, Kentucky at 33-1. You've got Purdue and Tennessee on your schedule, both at 40-1, Creighton at 45-1. It's going to be a very, very challenging schedule. And so just caution yourself and remind yourself throughout the entire year when Alabama is battling some of these more premier programs in non-conference play, Alabama's going to get some wins for sure, but it's pretty much guaranteed, in my opinion, that Alabama's going to take a loss or two in non-conference play, or 3 or 4, or what was it last year, 6 non-conference games that they lost. They lost what? Clemson, and then the 3 big ones. So that was 4. I think it was 6, just off the top of my head. So and Alabama still got to the Final Four despite the defensive deficiencies that plagued the team the entire season. I had a friend ask me on Saturday, Joe, I just wonder if Coach Oates is going to be able to keep everybody happy with minutes. And I don't know that that's going to be a concern for this coaching staff. Of course, you want to keep everybody happy because you want everybody to be bought in and invested in the program. But I think that with the depth of this team, with the leadership of Mark Sears, Grant Nelson, and Latrell Wrightsell, I think that you will have a bit of a top-down leadership and a bit of a, hey, if you're not happy, if you're not bought into the system, if you're not playing defense, well, the bench is waiting for you and is nice and warm. I think that this team, we've talked about it before, is going to have the opportunity to play faster than any Alabama basketball team under Nate Oates has ever played, at a pace that absolutely runs teams off the floor. I think that we are expecting, people have talked about Mark Sears and his contribution. I think that his minutes will come down this season, but I don't think it's going to be a bad thing. I think everyone's minutes are going to be more spread out this year if they're committed to the defensive end. So I'm very excited still for Alabama basketball, and a little bit floored that BetAG has Alabama basketball as the favorite at 8-1 to win the NCAA tournament. That's going to do it for our Alabama portion of today's program. We're going to turn it over by expanding ourselves on the Walsh Writing Network. Very, very soon, we're going to be breaking these out into their own podcast. We'll have the Alabama segments all on their own. And so if you just are listening to us for the Alabama segments, I appreciate you guys for giving us a chance with the other segments. But very soon, we're going to have the Alabama segments on their own, and we'll have each of the Walsh Writing Network segments, Missouri Central, Kane Central, Mississippi State. We'll have each of those websites broken out on their own podcast. So if you're looking for just Missouri, or just Boston College, or just Kansas City Royals, or San Antonio Spurs talk, you can find those you'll be able to find those on the websites of their respective homes. We'll quit contaminating the Alabama segments with these other topics and discussions. But that's going to do it for our Alabama portion for the day. You can always follow me at Joe Gaither6 on whatever your favorite social media machine is, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, whether it be Instagram, Snapchat, whatever social medias that you want to use. It's at Joe Gaither6. We appreciate you subscribing to the Bama Central YouTube channel, and we appreciate you subscribing to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on Amazon. Welcome back in. This is the Joe Gaither Show right here on MizzouCentral.com. Right now, we're transitioning to into the other website on the Walsh Writing Network. I'm Joe Gaither. You're watching us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. You're listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Amazon. Let's talk about some Missouri Tigers. Last week, we were joined by Joey Van Zummeren, and we talked all football. We predicted the 2024 football schedule, and maybe the Missouri Tigers are going to the college football playoffs. So if you want to catch that, you can hear that on the prior episodes on any of those podcast platforms. But today with Joey Van Zummeren, we're going to talk basketball. And oh my gosh, it was not a pretty basketball season last year in Missouri. You can follow Joey at JoeyVZ_ for all of his coverage right there on the Twitter machine. And make sure you're reading him daily at MizzouCentral.com. Joey, how are we doing today, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. And I don't know if this Mizzou basketball team, if many would describe it as exciting to talk about, but it certainly is an interesting collection of athletes and coaches. So I'm excited myself to talk about it today.
All right, well, let's start with what happened last year. Obviously, people who are listening to this show majority of the time are watching for Alabama coverage, and it was a up and down season that ended on the highest of highs, really getting to the Final Four. But Missouri didn't win a single game. Now, this was coming off a game in the SEC. Didn't win a single game in the SEC. They were 8-24 overall. But this was coming off of what was a pretty successful first year for Dennis Gates. So what happened in the regression for Dennis Gates?
Yeah, I think the big thing that most people would be able to latch onto and understand is Kobe Brown not being there anymore. He was a first-round draft pick to the Clippers last year and was just such a big part to what Mizzou was doing in the 2022 and 2023 season. And, with the loss of him, it was not only the loss of an incredible scorer, driver in the paint that he is, but also just the guys around him that now in 2023 and 2024 season had to step up into much larger roles. So you had quite a few players follow Dennis Gates from Cleveland State, Sean East being one of them, Noah Carter as well. And they, in tandem with Kobe Brown, worked really well as these role players. In 2023 and 2024, though, both of those guys were asked to do a lot more, not only on the court, but also just with our leadership. That was a big point of emphasis that Dennis made all throughout the offseason. And, Sean East did pretty well. I think he just worked out at the G League Combine, something with NBA. And Noah Carter, not as much, but he was always kind of inconsistent anyways. But it was just evident that both of those guys specifically, and Nick Honor being another one of them, a former Clemson guy, of just being asked to do a little too much than what they're able to do. And, on top of it, there was never really that guy that Kobe Brown was. Not that every team needs to have a Kobe Brown, although it is very nice, but there was never really a main person you could rely on night in and night out to score over 20 points a game. Jamar Bates, transfer from Indiana, kind of emerged as that guy later on. He wasn't quite performing in the assist department, though, so it was just quite a mashup of issues there for Mizzou last year. And then also another big thing is just injury bugs. It's easy to blame it on that, but that was a valid reason from them. You had Caleb Grill missing the majority of the season with a wrist injury he suffered. And I do think that was kind of a big loss, not only for, again, just his play itself, but then also just the attitude he brought to this team. You look back at the first 10 games of the season, right before Mizzou started conference play, and Caleb Grill, even though he was inconsistent at some times, it wasn't an all-around player. He had so much attitude, so much aggressiveness that really brought an identity to the team that it completely lacked after his loss. So I think just his personality in itself, and Dennis Gates talked about that a lot when Grill was healthy. He got ejected from a game, I believe it was the Minnesota game or the Pittsburgh game, one of the games where Mizzou had an incredible comeback in the final minutes. Caleb Grill got ejected from that game just under 10 minutes remaining. And then after that, Mizzou was propelled on this epic comeback to revenge Caleb, I guess. So yeah, just a lot of issues for Mizzou this year, and there's plenty of reason to believe though that they will improve into this upcoming year. But Dennis Gates' back is kind of against the wall here, although he is recruiting well, which we'll talk about today, I'm sure.
Every team needs that garbage man, the one who's going to, okay, I'm going to defend your best player, or I'm going to go in and get a rebound, or maybe I will give someone an elbow that's unbecoming of sportsmanship. Everybody needs that garbage guy to really give a little sense of toughness to a team. Losing that is never easy. So we're moving into this coming season, and okay, the surface level is basically, you lost every single conference game. How does Dennis Gates still have his job? Well, then you go to all the recruiting websites, and wow, he's got a top 15 class. He's got a top 12 class. Depends on where you want to look. He's got a top end class. He's signed guys like Honor Boateng, Peyton Marshall, Marcus Allen, Trent Burns, and T.O. Barrett. And then if you look at their stats, there's, it's 7'3", it's 7 foot, it's 6'6". So he's bringing in a lot of long guys that are 3 and 4 stars. Well, only 1 3-star, according to 24/7, T.O. Barrett out of Link Academy. But Link Academy was national champions at the high school level. So, this guy, good little player, point guard. Was it all just, hey, let's hang on and see what he can do with this next recruiting class?
Yeah, I think that, and just, again, he was dealing with a rough situation last year, I think. And yeah, he proved in last year's offseason as well, just his ability to recruit, especially through the transfer portal. I think, as far as the reason he kept his job is because of that. And I mean, I think you can see when talking to him why he recruits so well. He is a very authentic guy, and he does, employ what some might list as cliches. And of course, the college basketball coach is going to say this, but he is not necessarily selling these prospects on anything. He's, again, cliche. How real is that? Every time you're recruiting somebody, you're selling them on something, even though no matter how you want to frame it, selling them on some idea. But he does really seem like an authentic guy, and I think that comes through to recruits and why so many players stay so loyal to him. And again, with his job security, I think that's a big part of it, and really let him end up developing those players, and that's going to be the big thing for him this year. I don't think unless he goes undefeated or winless in conference play again this year, I see a hard time being fired after this upcoming season. But I think the bigger thing, record is obviously going to play a part in it. But the main thing they're going to have to look at, and whether they want to keep Gates or not moving forward, is just going to be, are these players actually developing? You can be the greatest recruiter out there, but it doesn't matter if you can't turn these guys coming out of seniors as high school and then not turning them into anything, because the best team of seniors in high school isn't winning many games in the SEC either. So developing them into an actual team, and so you're gonna have to have guys like Trent Pierce, Anthony Robinson, that class from 2023 developing into something. And same with these freshmen this year. A lot of them are just really raw prospects that have a lot of natural athleticism, the right builds, as you mentioned with a few of them. You got Peyton Marshall, a 7-foot, 300-pound freshman that looks like a lot more like a tight end than a defensive end. So he's really going to have to, show that he's able to develop players and not only recruit them this year to really get himself some more job security.
All right, well, he didn't just leave it to the high schoolers to come in and save him. He also hit the transfer portal pretty hard. And so I'm looking through it. Their portal class is Mark Mitchell out of Duke. It's Marquise Warwick out of, Northern Kentucky? Yeah, Northern Kentucky. Yep. He's got Tony Perkins out of Iowa and Jacob Cruz out of UT Martin. And so first thing I see is, you bring in somebody from Duke, you pull up his numbers. He's 6'9", 230 pounds. He played 30 minutes a game, almost 30 minutes a game last year for Duke, averaging just over 11 points. What do you make of his transfer portal class? I know that that's the new wave of college basketball. You think that their additions are going to help maybe solidify and buy him more time to develop some of his own players?
Yeah, for sure. I think specifically as far as kind of like adding a buffer to, have these freshmen coming in, and, just the traits that I just mentioned. There's a few guys on here that are really going to have some buffer time where these freshmen won't have to be thrown right into the fire, and have some more time to develop and be used at more optimal times, put them in positions to succeed. One of them is Josh Gray. He plays inside really well. A center from South Carolina, used to play at LSU in his freshman year, and I see him being a direct, he's 7 foot as well, but he's 330 pounds lighter than Peyton Marshall, the freshman. But again, just that's the main example I can think of as far as buying some freshmen some time. And I think just the addition of him, he's the only transfer coming in that's not a 4-star transfer prospect. He was a 3-star from South Carolina, like I mentioned. Just a really good facilitator, and I think something that Mizzou was missing last year on the inside. You had Mabor Majak there, who was another guy that stayed loyal to Dennis Gates in his transition to Missouri from Cleveland State. But he definitely had the size Majak did, but not much else. He wasn't a very fluid athlete, which I think Josh Gray definitely is. Wasn't the best passer. So I think Ray is really going to help them out and really just make things much smoother offensively. They got some great shooters as well, Gray being one of them, and then Jacob Cruz from UT Martin. Marcus Warwick, who's just an incredible shooter, is full of trick shots. He had one, I forget who it was, but when he was playing for North Kentucky, he had an incredible 3-pointer basically from half court, buzzer beater to win a game. Tony Perkins from Iowa, another great shooter. Mark Mitchell, like you mentioned, from Duke, is the headliner of this transfer class. Kansas City native, was I believe the top 20 prospect nationally out of the transfer portal. I have no doubts and concerns on how Mark Mitchell is going to do defensively. I think he's going to immediately contribute there. But you look at his shooting performance at Duke, and it's like, okay, you can definitely improve in some areas here and need some development offensively. So it is going to be interesting to watch just how this team kind of forms its identity throughout the season. That's one thing I mentioned on the top of the 2023 team. It just kept on. It felt like every week we were asking Dennis the same questions about his team, and he was giving us the same answers because the same exact thing was happening every single week. They lacked identity. They lacked consistency. And that really was the reason they lost a lot of their games. They would play great for 20 minutes of the game and then play terrible the other 20 minutes. They'd had, became, I wouldn't say famous for, but their trademark for 2023 was collapsing in the last 5 minutes after looking like having a promising comeback on the way, even if they, no matter what happened in the first half. So I'm really interested to see how quick this team forms their identity and what that ends up being, because in 2022 and 2023, like I mentioned with Kobe Brown and there, it just became, especially in the first 10 minutes, they were going to go really fast. They were going to come out of the gate screaming. They weren't going to worry too much about offensive play design. They were going to shoot and shoot and shoot a bunch of baskets and hope that they exhausted you and scored a bunch of points and then go from there. So we'll see what they can craft this year.
I want to focus on Marcus Warwick just for a moment here. Marcus Warwick out of Northern Kentucky, played in the Horizon League. All right, Dennis Gates very familiar with the Horizon League with his time at Cleveland State. You get a guy who's going into his 5th year. So it's like, okay, I played at Northern Kentucky for 4 years, and now I'm graduating or moving up into a Power 5 league, Power 4 league. Tell me about it, maybe the transition from some of those Cleveland State guys to Missouri initially, and then how you expect this guy. I mean, look, I'm looking at his numbers, almost 20 points a game. He's 87% free throw shooter, maybe not as good of a 3-ball shooter as you'd like last year at 29%, but he had a year where he went almost 40%. So, I mean, it seems like a volume scorer. And when you're talking about, a guy who can go get a bucket while all my freshmen are trying to learn the game, it seems like a nice little fit. Do you have any concerns about him moving up from the Horizon League into the SEC?
Yeah, certainly. I think it would be unrealistic not to think that there would be at least a little bit of a transition period for him. But I do think, just with his experience is something that you have to like with, even with the guys I spent a little bit of time, talking about how they underperformed last year, the Noah Carters of the world. Their veteran experience was something that Dennis Gates really valued and will obviously have to be a key component for these upcoming years with how many freshmen they have coming in and what they need to develop there. So I think his experience, even though it was in the Horizon League at North Kentucky, will be something that's valued. And I'm really interested, like you are, to see just how what that transition period looks like. If he is such a talented shooter that he can get away with it a little bit, and then eventually become a more refined defensive player, because I would think that'd be much more of a challenge to adjust to than offensively. As far as just how long it took some of those guys when Dennis Gates was coming over from Cleveland State. There were some that really just instantly had no problem. Demoy Hodge, DeAndre Golston, Trey Gomillion, all three were pretty. I mean, I would say, it did take them in 2022 a little bit of time to kind of find their groove all together, because they were kind of just mashing 2 different teams together. But all 3 of them, it never. I would say, Kobe Brown probably covered up a lot of holes on that team again. But it wasn't as dramatic as I expected, at least when they were all coming over from Cleveland State.
All right, so let's wrap up the basketball topic with one more question about Dennis Gates and kind of projecting ahead to this season. we don't want a winless season. That's obvious to anyone and everyone in the league. Dennis Gates qualified. He got Missouri to the NCAA tournament, the 2023 NCAA tournament. They won in round 1, lost in round 2. So he's got himself a little bit of March Madness success. What's it gonna take to say, all right, we're gonna continue to add to this leash? I mean, he's obviously shown he's a good recruiter. He's obviously shown he's good at making relationships, and that's very important. But is it, hey, you got to finish? Oh, it's going to be 16 teams in the SEC. You got to finish 8th or better, or you got to finish in the top 10, or hey, let's qualify for the NCAA tournament. What would be the safety zone for Dennis Gates to where obviously some of the fans are going to be fans, and they're going to call for his job unless he wins a national title. People do that. But realistically, the administration, they say, okay, this is going in the right direction if.
Yeah, it's hard to place an exact number or landmark on it. But I do think, I mean, 8th in the SEC seems like a pretty good place to put it. I wouldn't say, if it's 8 through 12, he gets fired. But I do think, again, it's going to become this year will definitely play a big part in determining what his future looks like with Mizzou. I mean, just if he has another year like 2022 and 2023, probably looking at a 5-year extension or something like that. But if it's another year like this past year, looking at, okay, we have a much larger sample size proven 1 point than the other. And, the 1 year in your favor is when you inherited Kobe Brown, who, although he was at Missouri before Gates got there and was never as great, when Gates was there, he always was showing some progress towards becoming that player that he eventually did and made him the first-round draft pick in the NBA. So, it's hard to put a benchmark on it. But again, like I said, at the top, really just going to have to show that he's able to develop these guys more than anything, even if they're not able to put it all together, even if it's kind of just a weird mishmash of transfers with experience coming from all sorts of leagues and some freshmen that they're trying to spoon feed along. Just show that he's able to actually develop those young guys and just not recruit them, because even though transfer portal is becoming even incredibly more important each year, you still have to recruit your freshmen, and you still have to turn your transfer guys into being able to compete in the SEC.
All right, let's flip it to football before we get you out of here. Just a little bit of time with Joey Van Zummeren. We're hanging out with him on the Joe Gaither Show, and you can subscribe to him at JoeyVZ_ on the Twitter machine and keep up with all of his coverage at Mizzou Central. We talked yesterday with Jacob Bain from Mississippi State, and we talked about wide receiver play under Jeff Levy. But I want to focus on a different position group with the Missouri football team. I want to talk about the defensive line, because we've talked about the Tigers wanting to qualify for the college football playoff. And you look at the Missouri Tigers, and they had a pretty good little defense last year, good enough that LSU hired away the defensive coordinator. And so you look at the defensive line. I mean, for me, football always starts in the trenches, offense versus defensive line. So I'm looking at these defensive linemen, and I'm seeing, Christian Williams. I'm seeing Chris McClellan, Eddie Kelly, Sterling Webb. I'm seeing a lot of interior defensive linemen. You're seeing Zion Young on the outside, Darius Smith, Joe Moore, and Johnny Walker Jr. on the outside. And then I go to Missouri's website, their college website, and I'm seeing, Missouri has 2 different defensive line coaches. They've got a defensive line for the interior and a defensive line coach for the exterior. And then you do a little more digging, and you see transfers galore in this in this group. Is he Chris McClellan from Florida, Zion Young from Michigan State, Georgia Tech and South Florida for Eddie Kelly? So these guys are coming from all over the place. How do you feel about this group? Can they hold up against the physical SEC? It's going to be physical. The running game is going to be nasty, but you're also going to have to get after the passer. What's your overall take? I mean, you hit it a couple of different times joining us. The defensive backs have gone on to the NFL, and so you're replacing defensive backs. Well, they can get a lot of help from a strong defensive line.
Yes, absolutely. And this was kind of another group that lost some talent to the NFL. You had Darius Robinson being the big one, the defensive end, who really, it was just incredibly versatile, played on his played at the edge his final year with Missouri. And last year they showed off a ton of depth on the defensive line. I think it's going to be a similar case this year with, like you mentioned, Joe, all the transfers they're bringing in. And I think out of all of those guys, I'm just so incredibly excited to see Zion Young, because when you look at him, he doesn't look like a defensive end at all. But then you watch his tape and just incredible power that he has there. And, I don't like to make comparisons from player to player, especially when you're talking about a guy that was first-round draft pick like Darius Robinson. But Zion, coming from Michigan State, has incredible versatility, just like Darius did, which is going to be exciting to watch, and how they use them and can really just go by whatever whatever need necessitates, whether that's injury or somebody underperforming. I think the leader in that room this year is going to be Johnny Walker Jr. And he's really, I think, one of the top stories.
Black label, red label. You didn't get it. It's fine. You're not a drinker, and neither am I. Johnny Walker is what, bourbon? I believe it's a high dollar bourbon. So.
Okay. Yes, you're right. Okay. I was concerned you were throwing around some football jargon that I wasn't familiar with. I was very aware of that.
I'm pretty sure it's Johnny Walker Black and Johnny Walker Blue and red. I'm not. Look, I barely drink, but I know the brand.
Okay, I'm sure there's somebody there that appreciates the reference.
Into your writing this year.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, one of the top storylines, in my opinion, to follow this year, because he's really going to have to, I think, this feels harsh to say, but really grow up, honestly, because he was incredibly talented last year, and after only appearing in 6 games in 2022, really stepped up and had a role in all 13 games last year, and kept on getting better as the season went on. But he still, throughout the whole season, had issues with unsportsmanlike penalties, extracurricular activity after the whistle was blown. You like to have that mentality on your defense, but when it's costing you 15 yards every other game, then it becomes a problem. And I believe even in the Cotton Bowl, he had a penalty like that. And Drinkwitz talked plenty of times how that's, unacceptable to have on that, because, you can't have guys. It's basically selfish to be doing something like that and then costing your team 15 yards just to prove a point in whatever beef you got going on with the offensive lineman or tight end. So he's going to have to grow up, because he really is going to be the leader in that defensive line room this year, along with Christian Williams, who has no problems with any character issues on the field. Not that Johnny Walker has character issues off the field, but just those penalties, like I mentioned, Christian Williams.
Under control.
Yes, exactly. He has a lot more self-control there, and he's always smiling every time I've talked to him. He's always laughing too. So Christian Williams is a great guy, and he plays more inside than Johnny Walker does, and so Walker's going to have to be the leader. And then especially you got you mentioned the transfers, but then also Williams Nwaneri, one of the top prospects in the class of 2024, coming in. Really excited to see how they bring him along into the fold here. He'll probably play mostly on the end there, and watching Nwaneri's high school tape again. Like I said, I don't like bringing in a bunch of comparisons, but he just reminds me of Myles Garrett, where it's just the unbelievable combination of athleticism, size, and power. So incredibly excited to watch him. And like I said, again, out of the transfers, really excited to see Zion Young from Michigan State. And then Eddie Kelly and Chris McClellan should add some really solid depth to that group as well. McClellan coming in from Florida, he'll probably play mostly inside. He's a big dude. Not as big as TJ Slaton, the former Florida defensive tackle, but he's a pretty big dude as well. So again, just like it was last year for Missouri, I think the defense line is going to be one of their most depthful. I don't know if that's a word, but a group with most depth on the roster this year. Yeah, there you go.
We've been hanging out with Joey Van Zummeren, and we appreciate your time, Joey. Thanks so much for joining us today. Make sure everybody you go follow him at JoeyVZ_ for all of his Missouri Tigers coverage. A little bit of NFL stuff with the Green Bay Packers as well. We appreciate your time, Joey. Have a great day.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. You too, Joe.
Yes, sir. Welcome back in. This is the Joe Gaither Show right here on the Walsh Writing Network, and we are expanding our coverage, going out to talk to an old friend. Kim Rankin is leading our coverage for the Boston College site on the Walsh Writing Network. You can find it at BC Central on SI on the social media machines, and we're going to find out a little bit more about this ACC football team. We talked to Justice Sandel last week about the Miami Hurricanes, but we get two ACC teams on the Walsh Writing Network, so we got to give equal coverage to the Boston College Eagles. Kim, how are we doing today?
I'm doing good. Excited to be on the show with you today and start the week off on a good note.
Absolutely. We last talked to you about Alabama baseball, and you did a great job covering the Crimson Tide this year. Now you're shifting your focus to Boston College, and you're going to be leading our coverage at BC Central on SI. Make sure you follow Kim Rankin at Kim Rankin1. How excited are you to be you're the lead writer now for BC Central?
Yeah, I'm super excited. If anyone, knows me or has followed me, they know I'm a big Boston sports fan professionally, and it's always kind of been a dream of mine to kind of work in the Boston sports market. And ever since, I worked at Tide 100.9 before this and now doing BC with Alabama baseball, I've found a love for collegiate sports. So I was really excited to when Chris kind of reached out and was like, I'm thinking about getting the Boston College site. And so I'm excited to run it. Obviously, growing a new website is difficult, comes with its own challenges, but I'm very excited to kind of go on this new adventure in this next chapter for sure.
Well, you're going on this new adventure, but you're meeting an old friend. Bill O'Brien has taken over the head coaching job with the Boston College Eagles. Jeff Hafley leaving college to go to the Green Bay Packers. So let's just start right there. Let's talk about the concept of Jeff Hafley leaving his head coaching job in college to go to professional sports. He's taken on a defensive coordinator role with the Green Bay Packers. What do you make of a coach who's taking maybe you could be argued a demotion, or some people could say it's a promotion to professional sports? What do you make of his move?
Yeah, I think it was the right move for him. I know Boston College went 7-6 last year under him, but really since COVID, they've only been winning 3 to 4 games a season. Boston College has always been a really strange football program because they've never been one of those dominant rankings every year, but they've always been a really pretty good sleeper team. They've always been the one to pull upsets. I remember a couple years ago when Clemson was kind of at the height of their dynasty, they almost beat them by 1 point. They were on upset alert a couple times with Clemson. I know even last year they were on upset alert with Florida State. They lost by 2, 31-29, almost beat them, and that would have been a whole different conversation with everything that happened with Florida State down the line last year. But 7-6 was kind of the best he did. He was in it for a couple years. Obviously, like I said, since COVID, they've really only won 3 to 4 games. Last year was their first winning season since before COVID. So I just think he was kind of ready to try, kind of do something new. And I think a lot of people like to leave for the NFL, and people see the NFL as the best of the best when it comes to football jobs. So that's kind of my thing. I just think he wanted to kind of do something new and get out and maybe kind of venture maybe into the NFL a little more.
And so Boston College hires Bill O'Brien, hires him actually away from Ohio State as the offensive coordinator. He was settled in as offensive coordinator, was going to coach Alabama's transfer, Julian Sayin, and, try to lead Ryan Day into the playoffs. But he goes off to Boston College, an area that he's very, very familiar with his time in New England as Patriots offensive coordinator. But he's back in charge of a college football program for the first time since he was in charge at Penn State. Do we think that he has the fire to really recruit up there at Boston College and make the Eagles one of the ACC's stronger programs?
Yeah, I think Boston College is probably one of the best destinations for Bill O'Brien. He was born and raised in Massachusetts. He's a local. He kind of knows everything. And so far from what I've seen from him since he got that job in January, he seemed to be doing a very good job. We'll probably go into it a little later, but the class of 2024 that wasn't even signed by him, he didn't do anything with that class, had 13 commitments. He's already got 15 for the class of 2025. Granted, they're all 3-stars, but he's already improving, and 15 in the middle of June is actually pretty impressive already as is. So he's doing a very good job from what I've seen from him so far. I know that you don't really know how they're going to be or what they're going to be like until you see them in an actual coaching setting, like come September when they play Florida State. But so far from what I've seen from him, I think he's done a good job. I think he was the best person for the job, and I think he's in the perfect position right now, because you can look at his previous thing. Like, he got into a really bad situation in New England. I know he was going back because he was friends with Bill, but he just was in a bad situation that was beyond his control. It was already, he was too deep in to kind of dig the Patriots out of what was going on. And then with Alabama, he was the offensive coordinator, and I think he did a fine job at Alabama. I know a lot of Alabama fans don't like him. I didn't really have a lot of issues with him. I thought he was fine. Obviously, there's a higher standard at Alabama than maybe Boston College. But yeah, this will be his first head coaching job in college since 2013 when he was with Penn State. He was in Houston as the head coach / GM from 2014 to 2020, then picked up with Alabama, and then was the OC at the Patriots last year. So yeah, this will be his first time actually as a head coach in college in the last 11 years.
All right, he's got a pair of interesting coordinators, Will Lawing and Tim Lewis. Will Lawing on the offensive side and Tim Lewis on the defensive side. Two guys that people in Alabama are a little bit familiar with. Lawing was an analyst here at Alabama, and Tim Lewis was head coach of the Birmingham Iron. So what do you make of his hiring? Because college, you got to have the right people in place. So what do you make of the two guys that are leading the offensive and defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously Will Lawing is someone who's been following him for years. Like, he went to Alabama when Bill O'Brien got the job as offensive coordinator. Then he went to the Patriots when Bill O'Brien got hired at the Patriots. So he's just kind of someone who's liked Bill O'Brien for years and has kind of wanted to follow his stuff. I remember actually writing about Will Lawing at my previous job when he made that switch out of Alabama. So it's kind of funny that I'm now covering him. But yeah, I mean, I think they're both really good. So someone who's been around Bill O'Brien for, years and kind of wants to work with him and does have both the mix of college and NFL. Tim Lewis is a great NFL mind. And I think that's beneficial for the players who they're trying to recruit, because Boston College has never been a big NFL team. They get a couple good guys every couple of years. I think they had 2 players drafted last year. So they'll have a couple here and there, but they never, Matt Ryan was probably the exception of, succeeding very well in the NFL. But I think it's good to have NFL minds along, because they kind of know what they're going to what NFL teams look for in a prospect, in a college player. And I think that's really beneficial for players' development as a whole. And I think that can make them a lot better of a team. But yeah, we'll have to, like I said, I've never been big on seeing what we have during the spring. Like, I can say what I've liked from them so far, but I think teams and coaches and players are going to look completely different in, a spring matchup or a spring scrimmage versus like playing an opponent that wants to beat you and, wants to get out. So I've never been big on like saying, oh, they're going to be like a playoff team or they're going to be a ranked team. Like, before the season starts, you kind of have to get a little feel for them. And they do have a big test week 1 against Florida State. But so far from what I've seen from all of them, I like it. I like the decisions for the OC and DC. I think they're both, really good veterans. They both have a mix of NFL and college knowledge. So yeah, I think it's a good coaching staff that they're gonna at least start off with, or at least start to build on where maybe Boston College wants to go from last season.
All right, so 7-6 last year, not under Bill O'Brien. They go into a bowl game. They beat SMU in the Wasabi Fenway Bowl. So they're playing right in their backyard in Boston. So obviously you made a bowl last year. What are the expectations under Bill O'Brien in year number 1? Does he give a little bit of grace and, okay, if we don't make it to a bowl game, it's okay? Or is it, hey, man, you made it to the Wasabi Fenway Bowl last year, you're going to have to at least do that again?
I think there's going to be a little bit of a grace period. Like, there kind of is for every coach. I mean, I get that they, had a winning record last year and they went to a bowl game and they won the bowl game. But this is also a brand new coaching staff that's, coaching versus last year. So I don't really think you can kind of judge them from last year. I mean, obviously the expectation is to have a winning record and make a bowl game for any first-year head coach. And I think Bill O'Brien is fully capable of doing that. And I expect him to do that next year. But I do think there'll be a grace period just because not only is he so new, but he also hasn't coached in college for a long time. So I definitely think that, and plus this isn't like a team that's had a winning record and has made bowl games for 5-6 years straight. They really hadn't made one since before COVID. So I think last year was kind of the exception, and they just kind of want to build to keep having years like that, and then maybe move forward to maybe, okay, can we get into the rankings? Can we possibly get into this expanded playoffs, etc.? Can we possibly win the ACC? And they'll build off that.
All right, so you alluded to it, a very, very thin recruiting class, 2020 class of 2024. It ended up being ranked 71 by 24/7 Sports, 95th with the composite rankings if you're taking On3, Rivals, ESPN, and 24/7. So not really a great class. 95 out of 130 programs, not so great when you're bringing in 13 players. Are there any of these high school freshmen, Sayer Torrance, Judah Pruitt, any of these high school freshmen, Omar Thornton, that you think, okay, this guy may not, obviously not right now, but could become a big-time player or big-time contributor for Boston College?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of them kind of have the opportunity to. Boston College kind of kept a lot of their offense from last year. So they retained their starting quarterback in Thomas Castellanos. They retained their top wide receiver in Lewis Bond. So some of the wide receiver prospects probably won't do anything crazy this year. And Boston College, they're all 3 stars too. Boston College hasn't really retained any 4 to 5 stars. Same with 25, not to look ahead, but it's very common for them to get all 3 stars. I think, honestly, the top guy right now is the top prospect from the class of 2024 that they got, which was offensive tackle Pape Sai. I'm sorry, I do not know how to pronounce his name, but he's an offensive tackle, the number 36 prospect in the class of 2024. He was also the number 1 prospect in England. He was they committed out of London, and he was the number 1 prospect there. And, offensive lines always need help, but he was the best 3-star prospect that they got last year. And I think he'll probably be the first one to maybe make some noise or make a name for himself.
All right, and so he hit Boston College hit the transfer portal pretty hard. He bring in 10 transfers, and I'm seeing 2 of them are from Ohio State. So that's a you're pulling from a pretty good program. What do you think about these transfers? Cameron Martinez at safety, Trayshawn Ward, running back. You got Jaden McGowan, wide receiver out of Vanderbilt, and he had a decent little year at Vanderbilt for a Vanderbilt player. Jordan McDonald, running back from UCF. You got a pretty good little mix of players here. Are there any of these transfers that you think, oh, this is a guy to watch for Boston College?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you already said it, but honestly, the 2 guys from Ohio State, especially in safety, Cameron Martinez. I mean, Cameron Martinez is probably the number 1 transfer they got. If my memory serves me correctly, he was a 4-star prospect from high school, and then I think a 3-star transfer. But he was one of the highest they had gotten. And I mean, Ohio State is very, very good at, making players. I mean, Vanderbilt, you'd have a great season with Vanderbilt, but they're, not really. Some of these programs aren't the best when it comes to talent, but Ohio State is one of those who consistently has top talent. So I definitely say Cameron Martinez, safety position for sure, especially because Boston College lost 2 of their top tacklers last year on the defensive side. So they're going to need a little extra help on the defensive side. So I think he could make a big name for himself first.
All right, so we're looking at the ACC standings from last year, and Boston College 3-5 in the league puts them tied for 9th with Miami. My man Justice Sandal from Kane Central, excuse me. I was trying to think of their new name, Kane Central. Basically said he thinks that Miami is going to be in the ACC championship picture. You've got a brand new ACC. You're bringing in SMU. You're bringing in Cal. You're bringing in lots of other programs into the ACC. Where do you think that Boston College could find themselves? Not a stone cold prediction, but you think middle of the pack? You think they're going to fall even further past 10th, or maybe fight for that ACC title game in the top 4 or 5?
Yeah, I mean, look, as much as I'd love for them to be fighting for the ACC title game, I just don't think that's really realistic with this type of season with a bunch of new coaches. I think they're going to kind of be middle of the pack. They had a winning record last year, but they don't have enough consistency to really know if they're going to maybe possibly have a winning season again next year, if they might fall. And the ACC is a really big question mark this year. I mean, Cal and Stanford and SMU can be good programs, but they're always really hit or miss each year. You've got big question marks with Florida State. They lost a bunch of guys last year, so you really don't know how they're going to look. You've got UNC, who lost a couple players, including their top quarterback. So I think the ACC just has a lot of questions, but I could see Boston College just kind of falling in the middle of the pack. They brought back a lot of guys. You've got, they've kind of had experience in the ACC, and the ACC has a lot of teams that are really hit or miss. So yeah, I think it just kind of depends. But I see them kind of falling right in the middle. I don't see them being the worst in the ACC, but I don't really think they're at the point where they can fight and possibly get into the ACC title game just yet.
All right, and so we're talking about the brand new ACC. What do you, just as an opinion, what do you make of, okay, divisionless ACC and the top 2 teams will go to the ACC title game?
I mean, I think it's fine. I mean, you have to change it somehow when you're adding new teams into the program. And unfortunately, I know a lot of people don't like the change. We've seen that with NIL. We've seen that with expanded playoffs. We've seen it with, the team expanded teams into different conferences. But the thing about college football and really any sport is it's always going to be changing. So you have to adapt to the change regardless of, the format. And I think that's just kind of the best format for how it's kind of leaning right now. So I'm fine with the format of the ACC and how it's working. I think Cal, Stanford, and SMU, it's going to be interesting having 2 teams from California on the West Coast trying to play a bunch of teams on the East Coast. I think it's going to mess up a lot of people, a lot of time zones, a lot of games. And a lot of teams, that's also something that's going to be new this year, is a lot of teams will struggle if they're playing in, multiple change time zone. And we're talking about a lot of teams who are on the Eastern time zone. So it's a 3-hour difference between, Boston and California. So it's definitely just a big question mark. I think this year is just going to be a really big, we're just going to have to kind of see how everybody is with all these changes, since it is the first year of a bunch of changes to college football.
All right, next week when we have you on, Kim, we're going to go through the 2024 schedule game by game by game. We'll predict wins and losses and kind of decide where that leaves Bill O'Brien. But as I'm just looking through it, this is a very interesting schedule. It kind of screwed Boston College a little bit at Florida State in the very first week, but you get a gimme back with Duquesne. You're going to Missouri, and you got Michigan State and Western Kentucky. So your 4 non-conference games all in a row, and they're pretty interesting. I mean, I like having Missouri and Michigan State, and Western Kentucky is not a horrible program. So you only get the 1 gimme game. And then from there, it's basically ACC all on out. It's just going to be a really challenging schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I think the ACC is a big question mark. So you kind of have to, it's a big guessing on who's going to be good, who's not. But yeah, that first 4 or 5 games right there, other than Florida State, which is technically an ACC, but I don't really consider it part of the ACC schedule since it is game 1. But yeah, that is a brutal start to the season. I mean, Florida State's always been good. Obviously, they're a big question this year, but at Florida State is no joke, regardless of how good or bad they are. And you've got Missouri, who is a really, really good SEC program. Western Kentucky, who's a really good program. And then Michigan State, who's also very hit or miss. I think they won 3 or 4 games last year, but they've been very good in previous years. So that also depends too. And it's just, they've got a really tough start to the season. If they go 2-2, it'll be impressive.
All right, so we'll talk to you next week, and we'll predict each game. We'll go through all the games and predict wins and losses. Tell everybody what you're working on with BC Central on SI this week. What's got your attention, and how are you trying to grow the brand up there at BC on SI?
Yeah, so currently I'm doing a lot of football previews. Every site on the Walsh Writing Network is doing early opponent previews for everyone. I just put out week 8 for Virginia Tech, which will be right after Boston College's bye week on October 17th. It's also their first non-Saturday game of the season. They're going to play that on a Thursday night in Blacksburg.
You get a Saturday off that weekend.
Yeah, I know, right? Road trip to Virginia, maybe. But yeah, so they'll be doing, so I have that out. We'll be doing more early opponents, a lot of recruiting. Boston College has had multiple summer camps, multiple official visits for a class of 25 recruits. So I've been on top of all the recruiting and stuff like that. So it's going to be a lot of recruiting, a lot of football previews, and yeah.
Follow her at Kim Rankin 1 on the social media machines, and follow all the coverage right there at BC Central on SI. Thanks so much for your time, Kim.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll talk to you next week.
Absolutely. We're going to close our show right there today. That's going to do it for us on the Joe Gaither Show. We appreciate Kim Rankin joining us, and we played our interview from we talked to Joey Van Zummeren on Saturday. So we played his interview as well. We thank both of those great correspondents for joining us. You can always follow the show on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube at Joe Gaither 6, or you can find it on the social media machines on Bama Central's YouTube channel and on every single site on the Walsh Writing Network. That's going to do it for our show today. Make sure you subscribe, rate, review us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on Amazon. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow right here on the Joe Gaither Show.
Thanks for joining us on today's edition of the Joe Gaither Show on Bama Central. Keep up with Joe on all his social media pages at Joe Gaither6. Subscribe, rate, and review the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and be sure to read us daily at BamaCentral.com.